In 1891, a 12-year-old black boy was sent to death row for a crime he didn't commit. But inside those prison walls, something impossible started happening. Dying men began to heal, wounds closed overnight, and the guards realized they were holding someone who could perform miracles. This is the true story of John Duncan, the boy who could cure anything except the hatred in people's hearts. March 1891. Yazoo County, Mississippi. John Duncan was just 12 years old when they came for him. He was a quiet boy, small for his age, with gentle eyes and soft hands. Everyone in the black community of Cypress Landing knew him. He helped old people carry water. He sang in church every Sunday. He never caused trouble. But none of that mattered when two white girls were found dead near the cotton fields. Before we continue with this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from. Thank you, and now back to the story. The sheriff found John sitting under an old oak tree crying. His hands were dirty with soil. Next to him, the two girls lay on the ground, wildflowers placed carefully in their small hands. Their white dresses were stained with dried blood. John tried to explain. He said he found them like that, already dead. He said he tried to help them, tried to wake them up. But Sheriff Morton didn't want to hear it. He saw a black boy alone with two dead white girls. That was all he needed to see. They put chains on John's wrists and ankles. The chains were too big for him, made for grown men. They dragged on the ground as he walked. His mother screamed and begged, falling to her knees in the dirt. His father tried to step forward, but two deputies pushed him back hard. The whole community watched in silence as they loaded John into the back of a wagon. Nobody could do anything. Nobody dared to try. The ride to Parchman Prison took 3 days. John sat in the back of that wagon, hands chained, staring at the sky. He didn't understand what was happening. He kept thinking about the two girls, about how he found them in the woods, about how he knelt down and tried to help. He had touched their faces, felt how cold they were. He had cried over them, and now everyone thought he killed them. The wagon rolled through small towns and past cotton fields that stretched to the horizon. White people would stop and stare as they passed. Some pointed, some spat. John heard the words they called him, words he had heard before but never understood the hate behind them until now. At night, they would chain him to a tree while the sheriff and deputies made camp. John would lie on the hard ground, looking up at the stars, wondering if he would ever see his family again. On the second day, they stopped at a small town to buy supplies. A crowd gathered around the wagon, men in dirty work clothes, women in long dresses. Children no older than John himself. They all wanted to see the boy who killed the white girls. Someone threw a rock that hit John in the shoulder. Someone else threw rotten fruit. Sheriff Morton had to fire his gun in the air to make them back away. But John saw the hate in their eyes. He understood then that he was already dead. The hanging would just be a formality. When they arrived at Parchman, the guards looked surprised. They were expecting a man, not a child. The prison was a brutal place, built to hold the worst criminals in Mississippi. It was a massive farm where prisoners worked the fields in chains, breaking their backs under the hot sun. The death row section was separate, a long building with small cells where men waited to hang. Deputy Warden Thomas Mitchell was the first to really look at John. Mitchell was 45 years old, a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had worked at Parchman for 15 years and thought he had seen everything. But when they brought John Duncan into his office, still in chains, Mitchell felt something twist in his chest. This was a child. A scared, confused child who should be playing with friends, not sitting in chains waiting to die. Mitchell read the charges slowly, hoping somehow they would change as he read them. Murder of 2 white girls, ages 9 and 7. The evidence was simple and damning. John was found with the bodies. His hands had blood on them. There were no other suspects. The trial had lasted less than 2 hours. The jury, all white men, took 10 minutes to decide. Guilty. Sentence, death by hanging, to be carried out on June 15, 1891. John didn't speak much those first days. They put him in a cell at the end of death row, away from the adult prisoners. The cell was 6 feet by 8 feet, with a metal cot, a bucket for waste, and nothing else. The walls were stone, cold and damp, even in the warm spring air. A single barred window sat high up on one wall, too high for John to see out of. At night, John could hear the other prisoners talking, cursing, crying. Some of them screamed in their sleep. The sound of chains dragging on concrete never stopped. There were 7 other men on death row. Most of them were white. They had killed in bar fights, or robbed and murdered travelers, or done things even worse. At first they didn't pay much attention to the new arrival, but when they realized it was a child, a black child at that, some of them started calling out to him, asking what he did, making jokes. Some were cruel, some were curious. One old man named Henry Walsh, waiting to hang for killing his business partner, told the others to leave the boy alone. Walsh had grandchildren about John's age. Mitchell assigned guard Paul Hendricks to watch over the death row section. Hendricks was a hard man, 38 years old, with scarred knuckles and a face that rarely smiled. He had fought in bar rooms and back alleys most of his life. He came from nothing, grew up rough, learned early that the world didn't give you anything for free. He didn't like his job much, but it paid better than field work and kept him out of the sun. When Mitchell told him about the boy, Hendricks just shrugged. He didn't care who was in the cells as long as they stayed quiet and didn't cause trouble. But Hendricks found himself watching John more than he expected to. The boy was so small in that cell. He would sit on his cot with his knees pulled up to his chest, arms wrapped around his legs, staring at nothing. Sometimes Hendricks would hear him singing quietly, old church songs that Hendricks recognized from his own childhood before life beat the religion out of him. The boy's voice was sweet and clear, echoing off the stone walls in a way that made even the hardest prisoners stop and listen. Something started happening almost immediately after John arrived. Something nobody could explain. 3 days after John got to Parchman, a prisoner named Samuel Cross started screaming in his cell. Cross was a white man, 40 years old, waiting to hang for killing a store owner during a robbery. He had been sick for weeks with a fever that wouldn't break. The prison doctor, an old drunk named Foster who barely knew medicine, said it was probably pneumonia and there wasn't much they could do. In 1891, pneumonia was a death sentence more often than not. That night, Cross's screaming got so bad that Hendricks went to check on him. The man was burning up, shaking violently, barely breathing. His skin was pale as paper and slick with sweat. His eyes were rolled back in his head. Hendricks figured he would be dead by morning. Maybe that was a mercy. Better than hanging. He walked past John's cell on his way back to his post, and the boy was standing at the bars, watching with those big, sad eyes. His small hands gripped the metal bars tight. Hendricks stopped. "What are you looking at, boy?" John didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "That man is real sick. He's scared." Hendricks grunted. "Yeah, well, he's dying. Nothing to be done about it." John kept staring toward Cross's cell. "Maybe there is," he whispered, so quiet Hendricks almost didn't hear it. The next morning, Samuel Cross was sitting up in his bed, eating the awful prison breakfast like it was a feast. The fever was gone. His breathing was normal. His color was back. He said he felt better than he had in months. Actually, he said he felt better than he had in years. The pain in his joints that had bothered him for a decade was gone. The constant headache he lived with had vanished. He felt strong and clear and new. The prison doctor came to examine him and couldn't find anything wrong. It was like the sickness had never existed. Foster scratched his head and muttered about miracles, and checked Cross 3 more times to make sure. The other prisoners heard about it and talked among themselves. Some said Cross was faking, that he was never that sick to begin with. But Hendricks had seen him. The man had been dying. There was no question about it. Hendricks thought it was just luck. Sometimes people got better on their own. The body was strange like that, unpredictable. He had seen men survive things that should have killed them, and seen men die from small wounds that seemed like nothing. But then it happened again. A week later, another prisoner named James Wilson cut his hand badly on a piece of broken metal he was trying to shape into something useful. Prisoners weren't supposed to have metal, but they always found ways. The wound was deep, bleeding heavy down to the bone. The doctor stitched it up with thick black thread, but said it would probably get infected. Back then, infections killed people all the time. There were no antibiotics, no real medicine. A bad cut could mean death, especially in a place as dirty as a prison. Wilson's cell was 2 down from John's. That night, Hendricks heard Wilson groaning in pain. He went to check and found the man holding his bandaged hand, rocking back and forth. The bandage was already soaked through with blood. Hendricks gave him some whiskey to help with the pain and left. When he came back an hour later to check again, John was standing at his cell bars, staring in Wilson's direction. His small hands were gripping the metal bars so tight his knuckles were white. Sweat stood out on the boy's forehead even though the night was cool. The next morning, Wilson unwrapped his bandage to change it. The wound was healed. Not healing, healed. The stitches were still there, but the skin around them was pink and new, like the cut had happened weeks ago instead of yesterday. Wilson showed everyone who would look, holding his hand up to the bars. The prison doctor examined it carefully and had no explanation. He wrote in his report that he must have been mistaken about how deep the cut was. But Hendricks had seen it. He knew how bad it was. Hendricks started to notice a pattern. Every time someone got sick or hurt on death row, they got better. And every time it happened, that boy John was standing at his bars, watching, or sometimes lying on his cot with his eyes closed and his hands pressed together like he was praying. A prisoner with a rotten tooth that had been causing him agony for months woke up one morning pain-free, the tooth somehow saved. A man with terrible stomach cramps that lasted for days suddenly felt fine. A guard who twisted his ankle badly walking down the stairs could walk normally the next day. It all started after John Duncan arrived. Mitchell noticed it too. He was a careful man, trained to see patterns, to notice when things weren't right. He started keeping records, writing down every incident in a leather notebook he kept locked in his desk. A prisoner's name, what was wrong with them, when it got better, and whether John had been nearby. The pattern became impossible to ignore. One night Mitchell went down to death row alone. It was late, past midnight. Most of the prisoners were asleep. The only sound was snoring and the occasional cough. He walked slowly to John's cell, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He found the boy sitting on his cot, knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the wall. John looked up when he heard footsteps. His eyes were red like he had been crying. Mitchell pulled up a stool and sat down outside the cell bars. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then Mitchell asked him directly, keeping his voice low so the other prisoners wouldn't hear. "Son, are you doing something to these men? Are you helping them somehow?" John didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly, studying his palms like they belonged to someone else. Then he nodded once. Mitchell felt his heart beat faster. He had suspected it, but hearing the boy confirm it made it real. How? How are you doing it?" John's voice was so quiet Mitchell had to lean closer to hear. "I don't know how, sir. It just happens. When someone's hurting real bad, I can feel it. Like their hurt is inside me too. And if I think about them hard enough, if I really want them to be okay, sometimes the hurt goes away. It moves from them to me, and then it just disappears." Mitchell asked if it hurt John when he did it. The boy nodded again, more firmly this time. "Yes, sir. It feels like their pain moves into me for a little while. Sometimes it's real bad, like burning or being cut. Then it fades away slow. But I get real tired after. Real tired, like I've been working in the fields all day. He paused, then added, "My mama always said I had a gift. She made me promise not to tell nobody. Said people wouldn't understand. They would be afraid or they would use me." Mitchell sat there for a long time, looking at this child who could do impossible things. His mind raced with questions, with doubts, with wonder. Finally, he asked John what really happened that day in the woods with the two girls. John's eyes filled with tears that spilled down his cheeks. He said he was walking home from helping Mrs. Patterson with her garden. She was an old woman who lived alone, and John would go help her pull weeds and carry water twice a week. It was late afternoon, the sun getting low. He heard crying in the woods and went to look. He found the two girls lying there in a small clearing, bleeding from wounds in their chests. Their eyes were open, but not seeing. He ran to them, knelt down, tried to use his gift to heal them, like he had healed others before. But they were already gone. He was too late. The gift didn't work on people who were already dead. He had tried so hard concentrating until his head hurt, until his nose bled, but nothing happened. They stayed cold and still. He had cried over them, these two little girls he didn't even know. He had placed wildflowers in their hands because it seemed like the right thing to do, something respectful. And that's when Sheriff Morton found him. John said he had the gift for as long as he could remember. When he was little, maybe 5 years old, his grandmother got sick with a bad cough that wouldn't go away. She got weaker and weaker until she could barely get out of bed. John had climbed into bed beside her one night and held her hand, wishing real hard for her to get better, praying to God to help her. The next morning she was fine. The cough was gone. She got up and made breakfast like nothing had happened. His mother saw it happen again when John was 7. A neighbor's dog got hit by a wagon, its leg broken bad. Everyone said it would have to be shot. But John had touched the dog, and the next day it was running around like normal. After that, his mother sat him down and made him promise to keep it secret. She said people wouldn't understand. They would think he was strange or dangerous, or worse, they would use him, work him like a mule until there was nothing left. So John kept it secret, only using his gift when nobody was looking, when he could help without being noticed. But that day in the woods, he panicked. He tried so hard to bring those girls back that he didn't hear the sheriff coming. Didn't realize how bad it looked, a black boy kneeling over two dead white girls with blood on his hands. By the time he understood what was happening, what they thought he had done, the chains were already on him, and nobody would listen to his explanation. Nobody wanted to hear the truth. Mitchell believed him. He couldn't explain why exactly, but he did. Maybe it was because he had seen too much with his own eyes to deny it. Maybe it was because no child could lie that convincingly, with that much pain in his voice. Or maybe it was just that Mitchell was tired of a world where a boy like this could be condemned to death for the color of his skin and some bad luck. Whatever the reason, he believed John Duncan was innocent. But believing the boy was innocent and proving it were two very different things. In Mississippi in 1891, a black child accused of killing white children had no chance. The courts didn't care about evidence or truth or justice. They cared about keeping white people happy and keeping black people afraid. The system was built to work this way, designed from the ground up to destroy people like John Duncan. Word about John's gift started spreading through the prison. At first it was just whispers, prisoners talking quietly through the walls at night when the guards weren't paying attention. But soon everyone knew. The men on death row. The guards who worked the night shift. The prisoners in the general population who heard stories from the death row inmates during meals or work detail. Some of the prisoners started asking for John's help directly, calling out to him through the walls. Men with old injuries that never healed right. Men with sicknesses the doctor couldn't fix or wouldn't try to fix. Men who just hurt all the time from years of hard labor and harder living. Hendricks told Mitchell they needed to stop it. If word got outside the prison walls, there would be trouble. People would either think they were making it up, lying about miracles to make the prison look good, or worse, they would believe it and want to use the boy. Rich people would come demanding healing for themselves and their families. Poor people would come begging. The church might get involved, calling John a saint or a demon depending on who you asked. It would become a circus. Mitchell agreed, but he didn't know how to stop something that happened without anyone planning it. He couldn't lock John away more than he already was. He couldn't stop people from getting sick or hurt. And he couldn't bring himself to tell John to stop helping people, not when the boy seemed to need to do it, like it was the only thing that gave his life meaning. Then one of the other guards, a man named Robert Clay, came to Mitchell with an idea. Clay was different from most of the guards at Parchman. He was educated, had gone to college for 2 years before money ran out. He read books. He thought about things. He was quiet and serious, and the other guards thought he was strange. Clay said if John really had this gift, if he could really heal people, they should test it properly. Bring someone who was really sick, someone dying, and see if John could help. If he could, maybe they could use that to prove John was special. Maybe they could get him a new trial, get important people interested in his case. Maybe they could save his life. Mitchell didn't like the idea. It felt wrong, using a child's gift like that. It felt like they would be no better than the people his mother warned him about, the ones who would work him like a mule. But he also knew it might be John's only chance. The execution date was set for June 15th, just 3 months away now. Without something dramatic, something undeniable, something that would make people pay attention, John Duncan would hang. They would put a noose around the neck of a 12-year-old boy and drop him through a trap door, and that would be the end of it. They decided to bring in Clay's own father. Martin Clay was 68 years old and dying of cancer. The doctors had given up on him months ago. The tumor in his stomach was eating him alive from the inside. He couldn't eat solid food anymore, could barely drink water without vomiting. The pain was so bad, he spent most days in a chair by the window, too tired to even read the Bible that sat in his lap. His son Robert had watched him waste away, getting thinner and weaker, the life draining out of him day by day. The doctors said he had maybe a month left, probably less. Robert Clay asked his father if he would be willing to see the boy, to let John try to help him. Martin agreed without hesitation. He had nothing to lose. He was already dying. They brought Martin Clay to the prison on a Sunday morning in early May. It took 2 men to help him walk from the wagon to the warden's office. His skin had a yellow color to it. His eyes were sunken deep in his skull. He weighed maybe 90 pounds, all bones and loose skin. They put him carefully in a padded chair and brought John in. John looked at the old man and immediately his eyes got wet with tears. He could feel the pain radiating from Martin Clay like heat from a fire on a cold night. It was overwhelming, a constant burning agony that filled every part of the old man's body. Without being told what to do, without asking permission, John walked over slowly and placed his small hands on Martin's stomach, right where Robert said the tumor was. Martin gasped at the touch. He said later it felt like ice water and hot fire at the same time, spreading through his body from where the boy's hands rested. John closed his eyes tight. His hands started shaking. Sweat broke out on his forehead and ran down his face. His breathing became fast and shallow. Everyone in the room watched in complete silence. Mitchell stood by the door. Robert Clay stood behind his father's chair. Hendricks was there too, along with 2 other guards who had come to see for themselves. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the old man's breathing and a soft humming sound that seemed to come from John himself. After about 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours, John pulled his hands away suddenly and stumbled backward. Mitchell caught him before he fell. The boy was pale as milk, breathing hard, looking like he might pass out or throw up or both. Mitchell helped him to a chair and made him sit down. John's nose was bleeding, a thin line of red running over his lip. His hands were shaking so bad he couldn't hold them still. Martin Clay sat very still for a moment, his eyes wide. Then he took a deep breath, deeper than he had been able to breathe in months. He put his hand on his stomach, pressing gently where the tumor had been. The constant, terrible pain that had lived there for so long was gone. Just gone. Like it had never existed. He looked at his son with tears running down his face. "Robert," he whispered, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "It doesn't hurt anymore. Robert, it doesn't hurt." Over the next week, Martin Clay got stronger. Not all at once, but steady and sure. He started eating again, small amounts at first, then more. The yellow color left his skin. He could walk without help. He spent time in his garden again, something he thought he would never do. When his doctor examined him 2 weeks later, the man was speechless. He checked Martin 3 times, not believing what he was seeing. The tumor was smaller, much smaller. A month after that, when the doctor checked again, it was gone completely. Vanished. The doctor called it a spontaneous remission, extremely rare but medically documented in a few cases throughout history. But Martin Clay knew the truth. That boy had saved his life. That boy had given him back his future. Robert Clay became John's most devoted defender after that. He started gathering evidence with the determination of a lawyer building a case. He talked to people in Cypress Landing, John's home community. He found witnesses who remembered seeing John at Mrs. Patterson's house that afternoon. He found Mrs. Patterson herself, who confirmed that John had helped her in her garden and left just before the girls were killed. He discovered that the 2 girls had been seen with a white man earlier that day, a drifter who had been working odd jobs around the county. Several people remembered him because he was strange and unfriendly, made people uncomfortable. That man had left town the day after the girls died, and nobody knew where he went. Clay wrote letters to lawyers in Jackson, in Memphis, in New Orleans. He wrote to newspapers, trying to get them interested in the story. He wrote to ministers and church leaders, thinking they might care about a boy who could heal. He even wrote to the governor, though he didn't expect anything to come from that. He used his own money, what little he had, to pay for a private investigator to try to track down the drifter. He did everything he could think of to build a case for John's innocence, to give him a chance. But the system didn't want to listen. The local judge refused to reopen the case. He said the trial was fair and the verdict was final. The newspapers wouldn't print stories defending a black boy accused of killing white children. Most of them wouldn't even respond to Clay's letters. The few that did respond said it wasn't news, or it wasn't appropriate, or they didn't have space. The lawyers Clay contacted said there was nothing they could do. The case was closed. Some were honest about it, told him straight that even if John was innocent, even if he could perform miracles and heal the dead, it wouldn't matter. The people wanted someone to hang for those dead girls, and John Duncan was who they had chosen. That was how justice worked in Mississippi. That was how it had always worked. As spring turned to summer, more people started coming to see John, despite Mitchell's efforts to keep it quiet. Guards brought family members who were sick. A few prisoners who were about to be released told their families about the boy. Word spread through the surrounding counties. Soon Mitchell had to turn people away almost every day. People showed up at the prison gates asking to see the miracle boy. Some offered money, some begged, some demanded, saying it was their right as taxpayers or Christians or human beings. It was becoming impossible to keep secret. John helped everyone he could, everyone they brought to him. a woman with terrible arthritis who hadn't been able to use her hands in years. She came in crying from pain and left crying from joy, flexing her fingers that worked like new. A child with a twisted leg who had never walked without crutches learned to walk straight and strong. A man going blind from cataracts who could barely see light and shadow could suddenly see clearly, see his wife's face for the first time in years. Every healing left John weaker, more tired, his small body taking on damage it wasn't meant to carry. But he never said no. He never refused. Mitchell noticed the boy was getting thinner, the dark circles under his eyes growing deeper and darker. Hendricks, the hard guard who never cared about much, who had spent his life looking out for himself and nobody else, started bringing John extra food. Bread from his own table, an apple or piece of chicken saved from his dinner. He would sit outside the cell at night, long after his shift ended, and talk to the boy. At first, John didn't talk much, just listened while Hendricks told stories about his life, about growing up poor and mean, about all the stupid things he had done. But slowly, John started opening up too. He told Hendricks about his life before all this happened, about his parents, his father who worked at the mill and his mother who took in washing, about his little sister Ruby, who was only 7 and liked to sing, about going fishing in the creek with his father on Sunday afternoons, the water cool and clear and full of small fish that flashed silver in the sun, about helping his mother hang laundry and listening to her hum old songs, about playing with other children, running through the woods, climbing trees, normal things that seemed like they happened 100 years ago instead of just a few months. John told him about church, how he loved the singing most of all, how the whole community would gather on Sunday mornings in the small wooden church that smelled like pine and old hymn books, how the music would rise up and fill the space, all those voices joining together, and for a while everything felt right and good and safe. He said he missed that most, the singing, the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. One night, Hendricks asked John why he kept helping people when it hurt him so much, when it made him so tired and weak. John thought about it for a long time, sitting there in his cell with his knees pulled up. Then he said it was because he could. Because God or nature or something gave him this gift, and if he didn't use it to help people, what was the point? What was the point of having it at all? He said being able to take away someone's pain, even for a little while, even if it cost him something, was worth it. It made him feel like his life mattered, like he was here for a reason. Hendricks, who had spent his whole life being hard and not caring about anyone, who had built walls around his heart so high nothing could get through, felt something break inside him when John said that. This child, this tiny 12-year-old boy who had been wrongly accused and imprisoned and sentenced to death, who had every reason to be angry and bitter and hateful, had more goodness in his small body than Hendricks had in his entire life. And they were going to kill him. They were going to put a rope around his neck and drop him through a floor and kill him for something he didn't do. June came hot and heavy. The Mississippi summer settled over Parchman like a wet blanket. The prison felt like an oven during the day, the stone walls holding in heat until you could barely breathe. At night it barely cooled down, just went from unbearable to merely miserable. The prisoners suffered. The guards suffered. Everyone suffered except maybe the mosquitoes that came in clouds from the swamps. John's execution was scheduled for June 15th at dawn. As the date got closer, Mitchell became desperate. He worked less and less, spent more and more time in his office writing letters, sending telegrams, trying everything he could think of to save this boy's life. He sent telegrams to the governor, to state representatives, to anyone with power or influence. He tried to get church leaders involved, thinking they might care about justice or mercy. He contacted newspapers in other states, hoping they would see the story as worth printing. He even considered helping John escape, though he knew that was impossible. A black child on the run in Mississippi wouldn't last a day. They would find him and probably kill him on the spot, and that would be that. At least now John was alive. At least he had a few more days. Robert Clay was at the prison almost every day now. He had left his job to focus on saving John full-time. His wife thought he was crazy, spending their savings on a lost cause, but she didn't try to stop him. Clay's father, Martin, came with him sometimes, still strong and healthy, living proof of what John could do. They would sit with John, talk to him, try to keep his spirits up. But even they could see the boy was fading. The healings were taking more and more out of him. He was so thin now his bones showed through his skin. His eyes seemed too large for his face. The night before the execution, something happened that changed everything. One of the guards, a young man named Billy Porter, was working the night shift. Porter was only 22, new to the job, still trying to prove himself to the older guards. He was walking past the cells around midnight, checking on the prisoners like he was supposed to, when he heard a sound from the direction of the warden's office. It was late, way past midnight, and nobody should have been there. The warden had gone home hours ago. Mitchell usually left by 10. Porter went to investigate, his hand on the club at his belt. He walked slowly down the corridor toward the office, listening. He heard voices, angry and raised. He couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the emotion. When he got to the office door, which was slightly open, he peeked through. Inside, he saw Deputy Warden Mitchell sitting at his desk. Standing in front of the desk was Robert Clay, and he was holding a gun. Porter froze, not sure what to do. He heard Clay shouting at Mitchell, saying he had to help John escape, that it was the only way. Mitchell was shaking his head, saying it was impossible. They would both hang for it, and John wouldn't get 10 miles before they caught him. Clay was crying, waving the gun around. He said he didn't care anymore, that he couldn't stand by and watch them kill an innocent child, that he would rather die trying to save him than live knowing he didn't try. Porter should have gone for help. That's what he was trained to do. But he was young and scared and didn't know what to do. He stood there frozen, watching through the crack in the door. He saw Clay and Mitchell arguing, saw Mitchell stand up and try to reach for the gun. They struggled, and then the gun went off. The sound was impossibly loud in the small office. Mitchell fell back into his chair, blood spreading across his chest. Clay stood there staring at the gun in his hand like he couldn't believe what just happened. Then he dropped it and ran, pushing past Porter in the doorway and disappearing into the night. Porter stood there for a few seconds in shock. Then he started shouting for help. Guards came running from all directions. They found Mitchell slumped over his desk, bleeding badly. He had been shot once in the chest, just left of center. The blood was dark and coming fast. Porter tried to explain what happened, the words tumbling out. Someone ran to get the prison doctor. Someone else organized a search party to find Clay. But everyone could see Mitchell was in bad shape. Real bad. They brought Mitchell down to the prison doctor's office, 4 men carrying him as gently as they could. The doctor, old Foster, with his shaking hands and whiskey breath, took one look at the wound and shook his head. The bullet had gone through Mitchell's lung. He was drowning in his own blood, choking on it. His breathing was wet and rattling. His skin was turning gray. Foster said there was nothing he could do. Mitchell would be dead within the hour, maybe less. The nearest real hospital was 2 days away by horse and wagon. There was no time. There was nothing anyone could do. Hendricks stood there, watching his boss and friend dying, blood bubbling from his lips with each shallow breath. And suddenly he knew what had to be done. He didn't think about it, didn't plan it, just acted. He ran down to death row, his boots pounding on the stone floor. He grabbed the keys from the wall and unlocked John's cell. John was awake, sitting on his cot, looking scared. He had heard the gunshot, heard the shouting. Hendricks grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him up. "Come with me, now." John didn't ask questions, just followed as Hendricks dragged him through the corridors back to the doctor's office. The other guards tried to stop them, asking what Hendricks was doing, but he pushed through them. He didn't care anymore about rules or consequences. He had spent his whole life following rules, and where had it got him? Nowhere good. He brought John into the room where Mitchell lay dying. Mitchell's eyes were half closed, his breathing rattling and wet with blood. There was so much blood, on his shirt, on the table, on the floor. Hendricks practically threw John toward the table. "Help him," Hendricks said, his voice breaking. "Please, son, he's a good man. He tried to help you. He's been trying to save you. Please." John looked at the dying man and his eyes went wide. He could feel the damage inside Mitchell's body, could feel the torn lung and the blood filling up his chest and the heart struggling to keep beating. It was bad, worse than anything he had tried to heal before. But he didn't hesitate. He climbed up on a stool so he could reach better and placed both his small hands over the wound on Mitchell's chest. Blood soaked through his fingers, warm and sticky. He closed his eyes and concentrated harder than he ever had before. Everyone in the room watched in silence as the boy's hands began to glow with a soft blue light. At first it was so faint they thought they were imagining it, that it was just the lamplight playing tricks. But it got brighter, pulsing in rhythm with Mitchell's failing heartbeat. The light grew and grew, casting strange shadows on the walls, turning everything in the room blue and cold and beautiful. John started to shake violently. His nose began to bleed, thin lines of red running down over his lips and chin. He made a sound deep in his throat, half cry and half moan, but he didn't stop. He kept his hands pressed to Mitchell's chest, even as his own body trembled and shook. The light got brighter and brighter, so bright that everyone had to look away to shield their eyes. It filled the room like lightning, like the sun itself was shining through that boy's hands. Then suddenly it stopped. The light vanished like someone blew out a candle. John collapsed, his small body crumpling like paper. He fell off the stool and hit the floor hard. Hendricks caught him, rolled him over. The boy's eyes were open but not seeing anything, staring at nothing. Blood ran from his nose and ears, staining Hendricks's shirt. His breathing was shallow and fast, like a bird's. When Hendricks picked him up, the boy felt like he weighed nothing at all, like he was made of paper and air and light, instead of flesh and bone. Everyone rushed to Mitchell. He took a deep breath, then another, clear and strong. The wet rattling was gone. The blood stopped flowing from the wound. Someone opened his shirt to look and gasped. Where the bullet hole had been, there was only pink, new skin. The bullet itself had been pushed out somehow, lying on the table in a pool of blood. Mitchell's eyes opened fully. He looked around confused, touching his chest. "What happened?" he asked. His voice was steady and strong. "I feel fine. I feel good." But John didn't move. They carried the boy back to his cell and laid him on the cot as gently as they could. The doctor tried to examine him but didn't know what was wrong. There were no visible injuries except the blood from his nose and ears. His heartbeat was weak and irregular. His skin was cold as ice. His eyes were open but seeing nothing. It was like he was fading away from the inside, piece by piece, like a candle burning down to nothing. Mitchell, fully healed now, like he had never been shot, sat beside John's cot and held the boy's small, cold hand. He was crying, tears running down his face into his beard. "What did I do?" he kept saying over and over. "What did I do to him? He saved me and I killed him. What did I do?" John opened his eyes once, several hours later. The sun was starting to come up, pink light filtering through the high window. He looked at Mitchell and smiled, just a little, his lips barely moving. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice so faint Mitchell had to lean down close to hear. "You're a good man. You tried to help me. I know you tried. It's okay." Then his eyes closed again and he didn't open them for a long time. Dawn came on June 15th, the day John was supposed to hang. But instead of preparing an execution, the guards stood around his cell, watching a child die slowly. Mitchell sent word to cancel everything. He told them to dismantle the gallows, to send the witnesses home. He didn't care anymore about orders or the law or what people would say. If they wanted to fire him, Let them. If they wanted to charge him, fine. He wasn't going to let this boy's last hours be spent preparing to kill him. They caught Robert Clay trying to board a train in Jackson, trying to leave the state. The local sheriff brought him back to Parchman to face charges for shooting Mitchell. But Mitchell refused to press charges. He said it was an accident, that the gun went off during a struggle over something else entirely, that Clay was trying to leave for personal reasons that had nothing to do with the shooting. The sheriff didn't believe him, but without Mitchell's cooperation there was no case. They had to let Clay go. Clay went immediately to the prison when he heard John was dying. They let him in. He ran down to death row and fell to his knees beside John's cot. The boy was barely conscious by then. 3 days had passed since he healed Mitchell. In that time he hadn't eaten or drunk anything. His body seemed to be shutting down, system by system, like a machine running out of power. Clay sat beside him and cried like a child. He told John he was sorry, that he never meant for any of this to happen, that he only wanted to save him. John squeezed his hand weakly, the only sign that he heard. Mitchell finally sent word to John's parents on the 4th day. He should have done it sooner, but he kept hoping the boy would get better, that he wouldn't have to make that terrible letter. But John was getting worse, not better. His breathing was shallow and irregular. His skin was gray. His eyes stayed closed. The doctor said there was nothing medically wrong with him, but he was dying anyway. Dying from the inside out. John's parents came as fast as they could, traveling 2 days without stopping to rest or sleep. When they finally arrived at Parchman and the guards brought them down to death row, John's mother saw her son lying on that narrow cot and let out a sound that nobody who heard it ever forgot. It wasn't a scream or a cry. It was something deeper and more terrible, a sound of pure grief that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. She ran to the cell and the guards unlocked it quickly, letting her in. She climbed into the narrow cot with John, gathering his small, thin body into her arms. She held him against her chest, rocking him like she did when he was a baby, when he was small and innocent, and the world hadn't hurt him yet. She sang to him, old songs from when he was little, her voice broken and raw but still beautiful. His father stood at the bars, one hand reaching through to touch his son's foot, unable to speak through his tears. John woke up one more time, on the morning of the 6th day after he healed Mitchell. His mother and father were there. So were Mitchell, Hendricks, Clay, and a dozen guards who had come to know the boy, who had watched him heal others, who had seen the goodness in him. John looked at each of them with clear eyes, more clear than they had been in days. He seemed at peace. He spoke quietly, but everyone heard him. He said he wasn't afraid. He said he understood why things happened the way they did, even if it didn't seem fair. He said the gift was never really his anyway. It just moved through him like water through a pipe, and now it was time to let it go. He told his mother not to be sad, that he got to help a lot of people, and that was more than most people got to do in a whole lifetime. He told his father to take care of Ruby, to make sure she went to school and learned to read. He said he was tired, so tired, and he just wanted to rest now. Then he looked at Mitchell and asked him for one last favor. He asked if Mitchell would make sure people knew the truth, that he didn't kill those girls, that he only ever tried to help people, that he used his gift for good. Mitchell promised through his tears. He swore on everything he had, on his life, on his soul, that he would tell the truth, that he would make sure John Duncan's name was cleared. John smiled. He closed his eyes and took his mother's hand and his father's hand. He whispered one more thing, so quiet they could barely hear. "Tell Ruby I love her. Tell her to sing for me." And then he was gone. Just like that, gentle and quiet, like falling asleep. His breathing stopped. His heart stopped. The life left his body, and he was at peace. John Duncan died at 10 in the morning on June 18th, 1891. He was 12 years old. He had lived in that prison cell for exactly 3 months and 1 week. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure by the prison doctor, who had no other words for what happened. But everyone who was there knew the truth. John had given everything he had to heal others. He had burned himself out like a candle, using up every bit of light inside him until there was nothing left. He had saved so many people that he couldn't save himself. They buried John in the prison cemetery, in hard Mississippi ground, under a pine tree. The grave was marked with just a wooden cross, and his name carved into it. John Duncan, 1879-1891. His parents wanted to take him home, wanted to bury him in the community cemetery in Cypress Landing, where his grandmother was buried, where he belonged. But the state wouldn't allow it. Technically, he was still a convicted prisoner. His name hadn't been cleared yet. So he stayed there at Parchman, far from the family and community that loved him. But Thomas Mitchell kept his promise. He spent the next 6 months of his life working to clear John's name. He compiled all the evidence Robert Clay had gathered. He wrote detailed reports about everything that happened at the prison, about the healings, about the kind of boy John was. He found more witnesses. He tracked down people who had seen the drifter with the girls. He worked day and night, barely sleeping, driven by guilt and grief and determination. Finally, in December of 1891, the state agreed to reopen the case. With all the new evidence, with multiple witnesses, with the pressure Mitchell and Clay had brought to bear, they couldn't ignore it anymore. A new hearing was held. The judge reviewed everything, and on Christmas Eve, 1891, John Duncan was officially declared innocent. His conviction was overturned. The state admitted quietly and without much fanfare that they had executed the wrong person. Well, they hadn't executed him, but they had killed him just the same. The real killer was never found. Some old folks in Cypress Landing said years later that a drifter named Samuel Pruitt confessed on his deathbed in Texas to killing 2 girls in Mississippi back in 1891. But by then it didn't matter much. The damage was done. John was dead. His family was destroyed. Nothing could bring him back or undo what happened. Word spread about what John could do and what happened to him. Newspapers finally picked up the story after his death, once it was safe, once it couldn't help him anymore. At first, people didn't believe it. They said it was superstition or lies or exaggeration. But too many people had been healed. Too many witnesses had seen impossible things. Martin Clay lived another 22 years, healthy and strong, telling everyone who would listen about the boy who saved his life. He died in 1913 at age 90, having outlived most of his own children, and his last words were about John Duncan. Thomas Mitchell left Parchman Prison in 1892. He couldn't work there anymore, couldn't walk those halls without seeing John's face, without hearing his quiet voice singing hymns in the night. He spent the rest of his life working for prison reform, trying to change a system that would condemn a child to death based on nothing but skin color and bad luck. He gave speeches, wrote articles, lobbied legislators. He became known as a voice for justice, though he always said he was just trying to make up for his failure to save one boy. He died in 1935 at age 79, and they say his last words were an apology to John Duncan. Paul Hendricks left Parchman too, a few months after Mitchell. He moved north to Ohio, as far from Mississippi as he could get while staying in the country. He became a different kind of man there, softer, kinder, more patient. He volunteered at a children's hospital, reading to sick kids, bringing them toys. He never married, never had children of his own. People who knew him in Ohio would have been shocked to learn about his past, about the hard, mean man he used to be. He died in 1921, and in his will he left everything he had to organizations that helped sick children. It wasn't much money, but it was everything he had. Robert Clay never forgave himself for what happened to Mitchell and, indirectly, to John. He fell into depression after John's death, barely able to function. His wife left him, taking their children, unable to watch him destroy himself. He lost his job, then his house. He ended up living in a boarding house, doing odd jobs to survive. But he kept John's memory alive. He wrote a book about him, published in 1895, called The Healing Boy of Parchman. It didn't sell many copies, but the people who read it were moved by it. Clay died in 1903, probably from drinking too much alone in that boarding house. They found John's photograph on his bedside table. John's mother died 3 years after her son, in 1894. People said it was pneumonia, but everyone knew it was really a broken heart. She never smiled again after John died. She stopped singing. She stopped going to church. She just faded away slowly until there was nothing left. John's father lived longer but was never the same. He became quiet and distant, working at the mill but not really living. He died in 1906. Ruby, John's little sister, grew up and moved north to Chicago. She became a teacher, married a good man, had children of her own. She named her first son John, and she told him stories about his uncle who could work miracles. When Ruby died in 1957 at age 73, she was buried with a photograph of her brother that she had carried with her whole life. Over the years, people started visiting John's grave at Parchman. At first, just a few people, family members or people from Cypress Landing who remembered him. Then people who had heard the stories. Then people who had been healed by him, or children and grandchildren of people who had been healed. They brought flowers. They brought prayers. They brought small tokens, things John might have liked. Some brought their sick children and prayed over the grave, hoping for healing even though John was long gone. They said sometimes they felt a warmth in the air around the grave, like John was still there somehow, still trying to help. The wooden cross rotted away after a few years, weathered by sun and rain. Someone from the community replaced it with a stone marker in 1895. Then in 1910, someone else paid for a proper headstone made of marble. It had an inscription that read, John Duncan, 1879-1891. He healed the sick and loved his enemies. Gone, but never forgotten. By 1920, there was a small fence around the grave, painted white, kept neat by volunteers. People left flowers there year-round. On the anniversary of his death, June 18th, people would gather for a memorial service. They sang the old hymns John used to sing. They told stories about him. They reminded each other that one boy, one small, powerless boy, had changed dozens of lives just by refusing to let hate and fear turn him cruel. Medical science would eventually explain some of what John could do, or at least try to. Doctors and researchers became interested in cases of spontaneous healing, in the power of touch and belief, in things that seemed impossible but happened anyway. Some said John had been a fraud, that the healings were coincidence or misdiagnosis. But they couldn't explain Martin Clay's tumor vanishing. They couldn't explain wounds closing overnight. They couldn't explain a bullet wound healing in seconds. So mostly they just avoided talking about it, because it didn't fit into their understanding of how the world worked. But no scientific explanation could capture what John Duncan really was. He was a boy who chose kindness in a world full of cruelty. He was someone who gave everything, literally everything, to help others. He was proof that real power doesn't come from violence or hate or fear, but from love and compassion and the willingness to sacrifice yourself for someone else. The prison at Parchman still stands today, though it's been rebuilt and changed many times over the years. But the old death row section where John spent his last days was torn down in 1934. Some of the guards who worked there before it was demolished swore they could hear a child singing at night when they worked late shifts. They said the voice was beautiful and sad, singing old hymns that their grandmothers used to sing. They said the sound made them feel peaceful, like someone was telling them everything would be okay, that there was something beyond this hard world, something better waiting. Thomas Mitchell lived until 1935, long enough to see some of the changes he fought for. In his final days, Surrounded by children and grandchildren, he told the story one more time about John Duncan, about the bullet wound that should have killed him, about the boy who gave his own life to save a man who couldn't save him in return. He said it was the greatest gift anyone ever gave him, and the greatest shame he ever carried. He said if he could go back and change things, he would have broken John out of that prison, even if it meant hanging for it. He would have done anything to save that boy. The truth is, nobody really knows what John Duncan was or how he did what he did. Maybe it was a gift from God. Maybe it was something in his body, some genetic accident that science still can't explain. Maybe it was just love made visible, the purest form of human compassion turned into something physical and real. Or maybe it was all three at once, or something else entirely that we don't have words for. What we do know is this. In 1891, a 12-year-old black boy was sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit. And in the short time he had left, facing his own death, he chose to heal instead of hate. He chose to give instead of take. He chose to love people who were part of the system killing him. That's not just a miracle of the body, that's a miracle of the soul. That's proof that even in the darkest places, even in the most broken systems, even when the world is cruel and unjust and wrong, there can still be light. There can still be goodness. There can still be hope. John Duncan's gift wasn't just healing bodies. It was healing souls. Everyone who met him, everyone who witnessed what he could do, everyone who heard his story, was changed by it. Some became better people. Some fought harder for justice. Some simply remembered that there's more to this world than what we can see and touch and understand. Some realized that every single person, no matter how small or powerless they seem, has the ability to change the world. The boy who could heal anything except the hatred in people's hearts didn't actually fail at that either. Because his story, his sacrifice, his choice to love instead of hate, changed hearts too. Maybe not all of them, maybe not even most of them, but some. And sometimes some is enough. Sometimes one light in the darkness is enough to help others find their way. More than 130 years have passed since John Duncan died in that prison cell. The world has changed in ways he couldn't have imagined. But his story remains, passed down through generations, told and retold, reminding us of something we too often forget. That kindness is its own kind of power. That love can overcome hate. That one person's choice to be good can ripple out through time and touch lives they never even knew existed. Today, if you visit the old Parchman prison grounds, you can still find John's grave. It's well maintained now, a historical site that people visit from around the country. The marble headstone still stands, though weathered by more than a century of rain and sun. Fresh flowers are always there, left by visitors who never knew John, but who know his story. Some leave notes, prayers, wishes. Some leave coins, an old tradition meaning someone was there, someone remembered. Some just stand there for a while, quiet, thinking about a boy who died more than 100 years ago but whose light still shines. And if you stand there long enough, quiet enough, some people swear you can feel something. A warmth in the air. A sense of peace. Like John Duncan is still there somehow. Still watching over the place where he spent his last days. Still sending out healing and love into a world that needs it just as much now as it did then. That's the last light of John Duncan. Not the glowing hands or the impossible healings, though those were real and witnessed by dozens of people. The real last light is the choice he made, the example he set, the reminder he left us that we always have a choice about who we want to be and how we want to treat others. That no matter what the world does to us, no matter how much it hurts us or judges us or condemns us unfairly, we can still choose love. We can still choose kindness. We can still choose to heal instead of harm. And that light, that choice, that example will never fade. It will keep burning as long as someone remembers his story and decides to be a little more like him. As long as someone chooses compassion over cruelty. As long as someone reaches out to help another person, even when it costs them something. That's John Duncan's real gift to the world. Not healing, but hope. The hope that we can be better than our worst moments. The hope that love really is stronger than hate. The hope that one small light really can push back the darkness. John Duncan lived 12 years. He spent his last 3 months and 1 week in a prison cell, condemned to die for something he didn't do. But in that short time, that terrible time, he showed more grace and goodness than most people show in a lifetime. He healed bodies and souls. He changed lives. He proved that the measure of a person isn't how long they live, but how fully they love. And more than 130 years later, we're still talking about him. We're still inspired by him. We're still trying to understand how one small boy could have such a big impact. That's the real miracle. That's the real gift. That's the last light of John Duncan, still burning bright, still showing us the way, still reminding us that in the end, love wins. Always.